Welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe that films are never neutral. There's a political as well as an artistic message captured in every film, sometimes on purpose, sometimes on accident. In this case of this series, I believe, well, at the point we're at now, I believe it's mostly on accident, but we'll to be discussed. We're on the lookout for all of it, either way, no matter what films we're looking at. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller. And on this episode, The History and Politics of Blockbusters, Part 4, 1999 to 2019. So, we're not going to be able to cover this period completely. I think it's actually not on accident. I think there's a lot of politics in these movies.
You don't think accidentally?
I think some of them accidentally, some not. Like, if you watch a Captain America movie where, like, the plot is, like, drone warfare gone amok in the form of giant remote-controlled helicarriers run by Nazis, I don't think that's an accident.
That's true, and none of the political messages in Passion of the Christ, which I'll be screaming about momentarily, I don't think any of that's accidental either. So, okay, I guess I misspoke. Maybe these are some of the most political blockbusters that we've dealt with so far. But also, like we mentioned on the previous episode, we were trying to do all the 90s, but I think you mentioned 99 as like such a interesting outlier for the 90s and really is kind of part of the 2000s move that Blockbuster, or the evolution that Blockbusters move into. Although we did mention Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace and things like that. But in this one, we're not going to, it's through 2019, so it's all open for discussion. But, I think anybody listening to a film and politics centered podcast in 2021 or in the future, I guess, we're all living it the past 10 years. It's the Marvel, Star Wars, Disney, Pixar universe, and that's what we got. So our focus is a little bit more on the early part of that decade, but few mentions here and there, I think, as we go. One thing we didn't mention though on the previous one though, really too much, was The Matrix.
Yeah.
So that's a 99 movie, although when that one came out in 99, no, that was spring 99. Never mind. I was thinking that was like the end of 99. Most of its money was in 2000. But there's these cultural memories we have of these movies. The Matrix, to me, I was like, oh my God, that was like one of the biggest things at the box office that year, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was actually number 5. But the cultural impact of it was gigantic.
Right. I mean, this is the thing about being number one at the box office doesn't tell you actually how important it's going to be or how influential it's going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, also, that's pretty big.
No, I'm not dismissing it at all. Like, the Wachowskis did an amazing movie there, but it was number 5 domestic box office, 171 million. Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, beat it at the box office.
I mean, also a major. I mean, so I'm looking at this. Well, part of it is this. Look at 99. The Sixth Sense is number 2.
Right.
Star Wars: The Phantom Menace, pointing us where we're going. The Sixth Sense, not really, right? Like that. That's a 90s moment that, as we get into the 2000s, is not going to come as much. And in a sense, The Matrix as well. The Matrix is like a giant special effects movie, but it's also hyper cerebral. It's the vision of 2 auteurs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not to go auteur theory on it, but it definitely is. And it's a movie that, so for instance, like, you watch a lot of action movies after that, like, Kung Fu becomes really big because of like the stuff that they're doing and things like that. But that doesn't actually enter into the top blockbuster layer. It enters into the lower layers, I think.
It does. It does. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
It's really influential.
Yeah.
In style. Absolutely. But weirdly enough, if I'm going to look at like what are the top for like, I don't know, 2000, it's like Mission Impossible 2, Gladiator, which I actually want to briefly mention that as a mini tendency, but we'll talk about 300 and we can cut the way. Castaway,
right?
Not something we'd ever see today. What Women Want, not something we'd ever see today. Dinosaur, was that really that late? And then, okay, interesting.
What Lies Beneath? You got the first X-Men movie,
right? So in a sense, by 2000, the first 2 give us a sense of where we're going, but everything below that really, in a sense, the 2000s haven't started in 2000.
No, it's just I think you get the first inklings of where it's headed in 99. Right. Actually, I wanted to point out real quick, I think the real anomaly in 99, like Sixth Sense and The Matrix are in the same category to me of like they had a huge cultural impact.
Right.
And
Yeah.
obviously, Sixth Sense made more money than The Matrix at the domestic box office, actually 100 million more. But The Sixth Sense, I mean, I was alive and going to the movies at that time, and that one had a huge effect on people because of the story
Yep.
itself and that twist ending.
Yeah.
But there was also in my head, I was like, oh, that was like this like little movie that it broke through the box. Like, no, it was a Disney put that movie out. It was a $40 million budget. This was a movie. This is a Bruce Willis movie in the late 90s, in 99.
Yeah.
The real anomaly I like to point out in 99 that you aren't getting, arguably there is like a venue for it, which is a topic for another podcast episode, but it's the Blair Witch Project. That comes in at number 10 domestically in 99. The that's the little movie that could 140 domestic, on a budget of, like 100,000 or whatever it was, just a couple of ex film school or film students, making this low budget, phenomenon. You'd get that again with like a Paranormal Activity. And then I think not to like the micro budget level, but Blumhouse. Like,
Right.
let's not go nuts with budgets. Let's do a good hook, interesting atmosphere, scares, great genre films.
Yeah.
And so you'll get that, but like that one just coming from like nowhere. And then also the viral marketing they did for Blair Witch Project, which was, is it real? Is it not? Or whatever. You can't, you could do it in 99 because the internet is not what the internet is today. But like that movie, that style of movie and catching people by surprise is just not going to happen again.
So
I don't think.
I think you're right. I would make an argument that the 2000s start in 2002.
Okay.
Because you look at that top, not even domestic, but internationally, Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Spider-Man, it's then Star Wars, then Men in Black, then a James Bond movie, then Signs.
Yeah.
So there we go. In a sense.
And an Austin Powers sequel.
And an Austin Powers sequel, and then like your weird, I mean not weird, but your romantic comedy, Big Fat Greek Wedding, and then number 10 is runner up by Minority Report. So that's that's sort of the magic of Spielberg that's sort of holding on in a different era of blockbusters, right?
Right, Spielberg, Cruise.
Right, that's in there.
Yeah, right.
But Ice Age, Signs sort of representing like. Once again, actually, it's sort of in a way what Minority Report is, like that your director can push it. But basically, that top layer, we're going to basically be seeing that for the next 20 years.
Well, I mean, I was going to say Signs. I haven't seen it in a while, so I can't speak to it as like, oh, I'm a huge fan or whatever. I remember enjoying it when it came out. I don't know if I've ever revisited it again, but it's one of the few things that you mentioned besides My Big Fat Greek Wedding. That's an original story. It's not based on anything.
And Ice Age, but that's a kids movie. Those don't really play by the same rules. So we talked about Signs, I think, earlier this year because I watched it for the first time at the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember, and it's so fucking weird. It is so weird. It's really, but it's like it's endearing for being weird. It's like what these aren't.
Yeah.
Nobody talks like a human being. What is going on? Why is
right?
But also there is a theme and more whatever. Like fine, you be you, Shyamalan. I have not seen what is it old yet, but
yeah, I kind of fell off with Shyamalan after Lady in the Water. Although my partner adores that movie, but she's a Alice in Wonderland fanatic, so I think it kind of ties into that fantasy world there. But
fair, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
but like just as we sort of go along, I think Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and Star Wars and Spider-Man, and then Pirates of the Caribbean and so on, really cement something. I mean, sure, I look at 2003, I see The Last Samurai's in there. I didn't
really. I don't remember that being that big. That's crazy.
It's number 6.
Huh.
It's huge. So part of it is Tom Cruise can continue to pull this stuff together.
Power of Cruise.
But like Terminator is number 7. God, I mean, but nobody remembers that movie. But Finding Nemo, Return of the King, Pirates of the Caribbean, Bruce Almighty is number 5. So like it's it's not that this is all we're just talking box office stuff. We'll get into analysis of these things, but it's not like it's all over by that point. But as you go year to year,
right,
less and less surprises.
Right. Which is also the story of consolidation at the studios too. And also like, oh, hey, we need nice, like, safe harbor for these giant international conglomerates we're running now, media empires. Like, we're not going to gamble on, anything. Like, it has to be established intellectual properties that are going to, make bank. And also we can do toys and pajamas and, everything else.
I actually take it back. Spielberg actually, I guess I looked at these numbers before we did this, and I realized we should get out of the numbers game. But Spielberg actually, like 2005, War of the Worlds is number 4.
Mm-hmm.
So like his cachet
It's
continues.
always been there.
Yeah, well, that's just it. It seems like when he does a movie, when he does a blockbuster, it remains a blockbuster, even if it's not, what it used to be.
Well, so that and Minority Report, like you said, it was not in my head that he worked with Tom Cruise that often.
But Tom Cruise becomes his star for at least
his like
movies.
early 2000s there. Yeah, that's interesting.
And that, that pulls you on through. I think Tom Cruise has a meltdown, right? And that sort of, but this is a period where, he's a star that can actually make a movie.
Yeah. But also, as we're going to be mentioning off and on throughout this particular episode, this is an era where the way to increase your box office success is you can only get so many asses and seats and eyeballs on the screen in America. And as we progress to the moment we're at now, well, actually, let's say we'll progress to the moment of 2019, you can only get so much of that in North America. You have to look elsewhere. And the era that we're looking at now, 99, 2000, up through 2019, it's a slow increase of that percentage of box office regularly coming from outside the North American box office. And there's pretty clear tipping points in the early 2000s, especially with certain, like The Matrix is huge for this, but also just Disney and Fox in general. They're setting up shop in other countries to do productions. And they also are able to get, strong footholds, maybe because of that. I'm not really sure the politics of that, to get distribution. Like China only allows so many American films or so many films that aren't Chinese films into their theaters each year. So that kind of creates a competition amongst Hollywood to be like, oh, we need to be one of those like 20 or whatever it is. I think there's a set number. Maybe that's fluid. I'm not sure. But it's not just like, oh, hey, we want to put this movie out. Thanks, France. You'll play this movie. There's a different mechanism in place for getting into the Chinese box office. Like if you make a Pirates of the Caribbean film, you have to cut out all the shit about, ghosts or whatever, because they don't want you to show anything about, ghosts or whatever in their movies or something. There's all these weird hang-ups and hoops you have to jump through there. But Disney and Fox are masters at that. And we regularly see post-Matrix more than 50% of the box office coming from outside North America.
Right.
I mean, more and more throughout this time period.
I mean, sometimes considerably more.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. And there's even ones as we were looking up different films for this time period that we wanted to talk about or look at. There's certain films that like the movie Warcraft that Duncan Jones, for whatever reasons, maybe he's just a big Warcraft fan. That should have been a no-brainer. That's a huge hit. That game is gigantic in the United States, but that's considered a box office failure in the United States. Meanwhile, it made like 450 million worldwide. Well, yeah, because like 40 of that was in America, and we think of it as a dud. It wasn't. It made a shitload of money. It just wasn't here.
Though not enough for a sequel. You basically, in some ways, your lower rung. All of them rely on the international market.
Right.
The international market becomes larger. You're looking at. I'm just randomly looking through. We're just looking at Box Office Mojo, right? Harry Potter and Deathly Hallows Part 1, 30% domestic, 70% international.
Right.
That's a majority, but there's going to be ones like, you're going to make a Harry Potter movie either way, right?
Oh, yeah.
But you're not going to, basically, something like Warcraft, it has to do well internationally. I mean, I think they all have to do. I don't know if this point really holds, but basically, they're really screwed if this is the only way they're going to pay this movie off.
Right. Harry Potter is an interesting example because I wrote down that in my notes that even the first movie, 300 plus million domestic, it was only 30% of the total box office. Like it started in 2001. Like most of this came from overseas, or not overseas. That's a weird, I don't like that phrase, but you know what I mean? Like outside the North American box office.
Yeah, no, that's true. Here's my question. So why does the consolidation lead to this? And why does it work? Because part of it is people are going to see these movies.
Right.
And they are catering to like international audience. These are big. They're in some ways they become, I mean, part of what it is, we've left, this is something that could be heavily contested. These are oftentimes movies, I mean, in some ways outside of the Marvel movies, really, when you look at most of these are movies that have left American nationalism behind to a large degree.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's not true. Transformers. Okay, we'll get into
We'll get there, but as a rule, though, you're right.
and in the Marvel movies, yes, lots of military propaganda. We've talked about this before, but nothing, honestly, much more veiled. And I know that seems crazy, but much more veiled than you ever would have had in the 90s or the 80s. Like, you can see the effect. You're not going to be able to sell these things in the same way internationally if you make them
Too jingoistic.
too jingoistic.
like the Rambo conversation we had about the 80s.
You'd never do that today. You couldn't.
Right.
I mean, there's a question about like, the Chinese stealing our villains. Like we can't express our current angst like we would have about the Russians or Japan overtaking us or whatever through film. It just can't be done. In fact, it shows up as co-productions and weird cameos and like, sticking in, scenes set in China for no discernible reason.
Right.
And I don't have a problem with our blockbuster starting to look international and being global and in some ways centering other places. But like, this is a little different. It's kind of obvious what they're doing.
Right. I think we're both very thankful that as a culture we've steered away from the whole real bad Arabs thing that we talked about in the 90s with, True Lies as an example or whatever. But
Right.
it's yeah.
They should have bought more movie tickets, and this wouldn't have been a problem.
Well, just as an international box office contrast, I wanted to point out it's on our list. One of the ones we're going to talk about this episode is Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. I'm sorry, not talk about. I'm going to be yelling about from 2004. That's 60% domestic, 30. No, it would have been like almost 40% international. So it's almost flip flopped. Wonder why that is.
Look, there's plenty of Catholics all over the world.
That's true, but like that movie is just not going to make. Well, it's not going to make any money in Israel, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that shortly. There is, there's a game you play with when you pick your narrative. How can you?
Well, it's not going to make any money in Israel. It's not going to make any money in a lot of the world.
Right, like most of it, I would argue. But anyway, it's also because it's rated R and all the other things we're going to get into in a minute. Harry Potter's kind of an interesting example to use, though. But it's also kind of almost like the controlled example because that was a global based on a global book phenomenon. So just by percentages, more people don't live in the United States and Canada, North America, that would be watching that movie. So it kind of translates perfectly to like, oh yeah, this is how this is going to work. It's going to make more money outside of North America than it's going to in North America. But yeah, no, that's I think it's interesting and it's one it completely comes to fruition in this particular area that we're looking at. Like you have to consider how did Hollywood term it? Like you have to consider what territories could bring you a shitload of money, and okay, let's not offend anyone in that territory as best we can.
Right. In any way,
we need a fantasy villain, or we need just a international, just generic Euro villain, like that doesn't have it's not the villains aren't tied to nationalities anymore.
And like you will have your Marvel movies or your Transformers movies, for instance, or the Dark Knight working through post 9/11 angst and war on terror stuff. Like it's not that politics doesn't show up, but it will be through allegory.
Right.
Which, in a sense, is not what we did before. We just went straight at it. We didn't do our straight action movies. And if you watch action movies all over the world, which look a lot more like, frankly, our 90s and 80s action movies in a lot of ways, they don't do allegory. But American ones do because, in a sense, they're so deeply internationalized at this point. I mean, I think, the other trend that sort of you see sub trends, right?
Yeah.
So one, I mentioned Gladiator. Gladiator starts a sub trend that I think you could say goes through 300. These are like lower level blockbusters, but they are. And then things like oh God, what is it? The Titans or whatever. Like a little. There's a mythology tendency, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't go very far, but they're trying. And then a really big one is young adult novels, which I think
Oh
you
yeah, yeah.
which I think you can say starts with
Harry Potter.
well, starts with Harry Potter, and then goes into really two female driven massive blockbuster series. So like you have your Twilights,
Yep.
and then
Twilight pops out in '08, and then you have Hunger Games in 2012.
right. So this is a really interesting period,
Yeah.
right? Where we really, I think, in a lot of ways, break a lot of the molds in terms of what blockbusters are supposed to be and what they look like. The quality wise, I think the Hunger Games movies until the last two are pretty good. I think they're actually toward the top of the heap for like these sorts of movies. And anyway, so like I realize that there's a new conversation about Twilight. We talked about female driven blockbusters previously, female quote unquote, right?
Right, right, right. With Ghost in 1990.
We'd realized that gendering of marketing is flattening and not a particularly good gender analysis, but also like this is how it's marketed. And I'm not going to say they're good movies, but I also will acknowledge that the hatred that they get also has a gendered aspect.
Oh, for sure.
Because there can't be shitty blockbusters that are targeted at a female audience. We can only make shitty blockbusters at a male audience. So,
Oh, I thought you were going in a different direction because I was like, yeah, no, you're right there. But I thought you meant the okay, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like a version of that reactionary, like frat bro, wait, dude, like what the fuck is this thing is also in Mad Max Fury Road.
so Mad Max Fury Road, which is debatable as a blockbuster, it might be a little second rung. I mean, I think sort of like Creed or something like that, but I guess we could say it is. Well, Mad Max Fury Road, and then what's happening in blockbusters in the last few years? The more diversification, and we see the biggest example of it, Mad Max Fury Road, they freak out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's hard to do there. Fuck you. Yeah, it's he's being displaced in his own movie. He literally is. The sequel's not going to be about him. And literally, you have Tom Hardy saying, like just in the last couple of days, that's great. That's great. They're going to be about Furiosa now. If there's more, which is fine, right? You pass the torch, things
Yeah.
change, and those people are going to go crazy. But it's like the Ghostbusters thing, right? Where
Oh, yeah.
where like, did they care this much in the first place? I don't know. I honestly don't know, but now they do. With Mad Max, I know they didn't give a shit. Fuck them. Fuck the insults. But yes, like there's the culture war. That's another thing that happens, I think, really in the last 10 years is the culture wars start really playing out. Which are not just culture wars, because things like Gamergates outside of film literally turn into like fights over like fascism and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Mad Max Fury Road is influential in the sense that it's, the greatest action movie made in the United States in the last pick your decades.
Yeah.
Right? It's at a completely different level. It's completely as it's the filmmaking, but like part of it is it enters into those culture wars. You have Gamergate, which literally, which is in the gaming industry, but like literally spawns fascism, and then you have The Force Awakens.
Oh, yeah. That's a good. Yeah.
Where like this is brutal, bruising fighting, and there's it's not the most consequential thing in the world. Film is but like it is consequential. It really
It
does
is.
mean.
Yeah, for sure.
And when Disney backs down on that and then sabotages their own biggest franchise. I mean, Marvel is the biggest franchise total, but the Star Wars movies actually, at least The Force Awakens, made more than any. Well, no, that's not true. Well, I haven't looked, but it's pretty close, right? It's huge.
The cinematic universe that was opened up with Star Wars and toys and marketing, everything else, way more money
Right.
wise. So they're just like, oh shit, we got to write this. We got to write this ship, and
water it down to death.
Yeah, quote unquote, fix what just happened with there. It was like, oh, like it was again as a non-Star Wars fan, I was like, oh, there's actually an interesting movie being made in this universe. Oh, okay, we're done with that. Okay, we're just gonna
Yeah,
pretend that didn't happen.
we're not gonna let this happen. And Ryan Johnson went on to better things. But like
Right.
basically part of what's interesting about that is like this is a period where this is a highly politicized period. You can call them culture wars, but they're really battles over cultural space, demographic transformations,
Hmm.
and what these things mean. Representation is a fraught thing politically. Having representative politicians who do the exact same things, which is generally what happens, is not particularly effective, right? As a political thing. But at a cultural level, it actually this is complicated, right? Because we have a giant BLM wave last year, and what ends up happening is every streaming service has like a line for like black directed or black led films.
Yeah.
And that's what you get. You don't defund the police, you don't do, whatever, right? Like that's they cushion themselves and protect themselves that way. It's very, very politically fraught to like sort of piece together the actual political significance there, right? Like
Hmm.
I don't think it's actually meaningless. I think it's important. And a lot of people disagree with me. I think it can potentially, if you're able to work it, create some political space, but it's also co-optive. So we're in a period in which they feel the need to co-opt. You can say this, and this is really rough about Black Panther in the sense that Marvel, they take forever to have a superhero of color at all, let alone a black superhero lead off a film. It's
Right.
a really big deal. It's huge. That puts, certain things, you know, you're going to be doing that now. But like, at the same time, there's a complicated dance between, and that's a movie where the director gets to play with the themes a lot more than I think did previously.
In the Marvel world, for sure.
For definitely, I mean, that starts I think with Guardians, frankly, and then continues. But it's there is a contest between the co-optiveness and the opening up of cultural space, not for really radical politics, but just representation. Representation can be good in and of itself, and it pisses off the right more than I think a lot of people in the more radical parts of the left that both of us might identify with
Yeah.
necessarily realize. That being said, it is co-optive and diverting to a certain degree as well. And I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, there's some of this stuff that's just straight up bullshit, but like at the same time, like Kelly Marie Tran being attacked and then sidelined. If you're into the movie world, like that has real political significance in the Star Wars movies. From one Star Wars movie to another, where she's set up as a
Yeah.
new main character and then totally pushed aside because a truly potentially reactionary and sometimes fascistic part of the fan base doesn't like her being there. There is some political significance to
Even
this.
if it's not set up, because like I thought she was more not maybe not as a main character, but like as a significant supporting character.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, just like, what happened there? Oh, are we just pretending that didn't happen? Oh, I guess we are.
I mean, part of it is when you think about there's basically what happened is that movie made a lot of money, generally to good reviews, but you have this fan backlash. Then they have Solo, which doesn't do well. They freak the fuck out, change their plans, put in JJ, who is not a good storyteller, and he remakes. Last time we talked about Robotech. This time he remakes Heir to the Empire. Oh, not Heir to the Empire. Sorry, Dark Empire, which is one of the first comics I ever read in the early 90s, a sequel that came after the Timothy Zahn novels of Star Wars, in which the Emperor comes back as a clone, possessing a clone body, which is literally what fucking happens in Rise of Skywalker. But what they end up doing is creating one of these sort of Franken blockbusters at the level of, I don't know, Batman v Superman, where it's very clear it's functionally not finished. Like at editorial level, it's a half baked film. It's not even a functional film. And I don't know why you release $1 billion movies this way, but they've done it. I don't think I saw any in the 90s that were quite like that, frankly.
Well, yeah, because they weren't quite operating in that same sandbox of like, well, we have the brand and we have some characters. Let's just see if this combination, let's throw that at the wall and see if that sticks.
Well, but it's more than just that. I mean, like, you look at, let's say, something like what, the way DC sort of struggled for a long time, honestly, to find their footing. I mean, they didn't have, I think, a real triumph with their movies at post Dark Knight until Aquaman, weirdly enough. And there's like the sort of revolution that Marvel puts in place in terms of storytelling fucks everybody else up.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's, we've talked about this before, but like basically that cinematic universe model, I think at this point everybody's given up on doing that. But during the years where everybody was trying to do that, other than Godzilla, which is actually really structured to do that historically, everybody's trying to do that and it doesn't work for anybody. Marvel's the only one that can do it, and everybody trying to do it kind of like it screws up their movies. They
Well,
end
it's
up
also it's what Hollywood, I don't know if it has always done, but has done for decades now. Is like, that's a hit. All right, let's try that model.
we'll try that model, but without realizing what makes it work.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a good enough preface to get into some of the stuff from this particular time period, post 99, but not quite exactly current, that we wanted to point out that was like of note to us as we were cherry picking going through this particular period. Obviously, there's like the big franchises. We mentioned most of them at the top of the show, as we've just been talking about it here. There's also like Pirates of the Caribbean. There's the entire Lord of the Rings section. There's Ocean's 11 still going on here. There's the launching and then rebooting immediately of Spider-Man. A bunch of things that we're not going to necessarily get into because there's already like clearly tons of analysis going on in a lot of these things. And also some of them, like, I'm just not fucking watching a bunch of Ocean's 11 movies right now.
Yeah, but those would be some of the best movies you'd watch from this
Honestly,
period.
at this point, they'd be so much better than some of the shit I watch for this.
I mean, it's true. I mean, it's
But,
like some good heist movies, man. Like it's like,
right, and I enjoy Soderbergh. Like I wasn't like looking forward to like Logan Lucky, but when I watched, I was like, that's a fucking great heist movie. I'm sure they're fine. I'm sure they're probably really enjoyable, and I'm sure there's probably some interesting political shit we can get out of there because there's a lot of Vegas stuff. There's a lot of like anyway, but you had mentioned the idea of the Franken blockbuster or whatever term you just said.
mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a better example of a Franken blockbuster in this time period, at least the ones that I've watched previously or currently watched, than Transformers: Age of Extinction.
This is the greatest advance in modern physics since the splitting of the atom.
A rare metal, molecularly unstable.
It's what they're made of.
Bring it up! All the way!
You guys have never seen a truck like this before.
Dad, you can't keep spending money on junk.
I don't think it's a truck at all. I think we just found a transformer.
I'm gonna ask you this once. Where is Optimus Prime? After all we have done, humans are hunting us. But I fear we are all targets now.
What is that?
Who sent you here? This is not war. It's human extinction.
And I have not seen the entire Transformers filmography, and I'm not going to. I tried watching the last night after this one, and I turned it off after like 30 minutes. There was just not enough weed or whiskey in my house to get me through that movie. It's fucking garbage. I can't handle it. And I totally understand if somebody says, Age of Extinction, what are you talking about? That's fucking garbage too. Great. But it was the garbage I was in the mood for at the moment. And it highlighted like scene after scene. I was like, God, that's what's wrong with Hollywood. God, that's what's wrong with blockbusters. God, that's what's wrong with Michael Bay. Oh my God, what is going on with this movie? And it was like the train wreck I was in the mood for at the time.
Let's have a conversation about this.
Yeah. So I guess since we're talking about a franchise, a cinematic universe, if you will, that Michael Bay has given the world, what Transformers movies have you seen?
So here's the problem. Like, are we really the best qualified people for this? I mean, I watched a good number of blockbusters, but my favorite blockbuster are either the superhero stuff, which I watch because I like superheroes and I'm a comic book fan, Star Wars because I kind of have to.
Mhm.
Or I kind of like your weird like Gods of Egypt or John Carter's, which are like the ones that are non-starters, but they're actually kind of fun. Like Gods of Egypt, problematic in terms of casting, not a good film, but holy shit, does it not make sense in the right way? In the way that Transformers movies wish they could be.
Your contradictory, interesting failure movies.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good way of putting it. Contradictory, interesting failure movies in the way that, let's say, this movie is not. So, like in a certain sense, and we'll talk about fast movies in a little bit as well. I don't watch a lot of the sort of like other big ones,
Mm-mm.
and I think Transformers is the big one. And basically, I watched the first one in theaters, so I don't remember. That was like a long time ago. And then I watched this, and I haven't watched the rest of them. And I don't think that matters at all.
I think we're in the exact same boat because I've seen the first one. I've seen this one. I tried The Last Night, and I tried the second one, Dark of the Moon, I think, or whatever that one's called. Revenge of the Fallen, maybe.
Revenge of the Fallen is the second one. And if you want to find a really good commentary on that, you can find Film Crit Hulk live tweeting that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredible.
That might be the only way to get through it. I remember watching maybe like 20 minutes and I was like, I'm done.
I mean, I think these are actually truly the lowest nadir of 2000s blockbusters.
Yes.
I mean, they are absolute trash. They're lazy, and yet they have all of Michael Bay's weird shit in there.
Okay, I want to ask you about that because you mentioned Armageddon on the previous episode. Armageddon, you've watched in the last month or so,
yeah,
a few weeks or whatever. So you mentioned on the last show too about how you did, or the last episode we did about how you were not that steeped in Michael Bay.
Yeah,
good on you. Lucky your brain. I'm not actually not that steeped in it, but I was around friends who were just like, "Oh my god, yeah, he was like great action director, whatever." At film school, and I was like, "Whatever." What is it that you expect going into a Michael Bay movie?
At this point, what I expect is heroes who don't act like heroes in any way, but are randomly violent and awful. Very weird daddy issues, basically, in which it seems like fathers, let's just put it bluntly, fathers want to fuck their daughters. Like very conservative values around that. Usually the dads realize that maybe their daughter should it's okay for them to have a boyfriend, and the boyfriend can take care of her. I mean, that's in both of these movies, frankly.
Yep. Yeah.
Like really regressive gender politics, incredible, but to the point of near parody. Weird splashes of Americana imagery combined with, this is less true in Armageddon. In Armageddon, basically, other than trying to blow up the heroes at one point, basically the government actually works pretty well. The weird entrepreneurial spirit doesn't really show. Well, this is the thing, is actually both movies, Bruce Willis in one and Marky Mark,
Wahlberger here, yeah.
Wahlberg in the other. Wahlberg's an inventor. Both of you have these entrepreneur classic American entrepreneur figures. But it's all twisted into a point where, and I know countless critics have had this problem where they can't tell if he's making fun of it or not. And he's probably not, but you can't tell.
Well, because he's terrible with his tones. Because the first Transformers movie, I remember being like, this isn't comedy that works, but they're trying to do comedy.
Yeah. It's really, that is actually it. The real problem you're having is he has almost next to no tone control.
Right.
It feels like. So lots of weird sexual hang-ups, lots of, Americana imagery. What's interesting in Age of Extinction, and I think you've noticed this as well, basically it's an anti-ICE movie. Years before that would have been a thing. Very suspicious of the war on terror. We'll get into China, which is really interesting, and I think the most interesting political thing about the movie in some ways. Very post 9/11, not really on the side of the new security state. Basically, the CIA goes rogue, but to the point of parody.
Yeah.
The civilian government is completely ineffective and does no idea what's going on, which is a trend that you can go back to your 80s post-Vietnam thing with the feckless bureaucrats, but it's sort of turned on its head in weird ways in Age of Extinction. But I think you see certain commonalities of sort of classic Americana but weird, just through a glass darkly. And then he's not actually a good action director. The thing about Age of Extinction that you pointed out to me is that basically the action is legible.
Right. So this one, I was surprised because he uses like fast cut editing and camera swirls to replace good choreography for action.
Right.
But in this one, and I again, we jumped in, mid cinematic universe, so whatever, I don't give a shit. But this one, there was a 3D element to it, and you can't edit the way he normally edits if there's 3D. It doesn't work. Oh God, come on, brain. The Clash of the Titans, the big 3D craze I want to say post Avatar, has to be post Avatar, was like everything's got to be 3D. So there was like this dimensionalization computer program that came up that was like, oh, let's make this movie 3D. Let's make this movie 3D. Well, you can't make it 3D after the fact. You have to. The reason why the 3D works in Avatar, regardless of whether or not you like the movie, the 3D pops in that movie because it's composed with longer shots. So that your eye, what is it, like your vestibular, whatever that is, that like can recognize the depth to it. You can't do that when you're cutting every half a second. There's not enough time for the depth to register, and it gives you motion sickness or fucks with your eyeballs, or you can't focus. Well, I think that maybe helped him lean into, let's hold a shot for a minute and compose. And so like there's these still slow motion swirling cameras that he does, but it'll be like as the transformer transforms or as something happens, and you're like, oh, I can orient myself in the scene and know what the fuck is going on.
And obviously the pinnacle of this is your Hong Kong cinema from the 70s or from the 80s, especially, of legible action, right?
Well, I was going to reference The Matrix, but they're clearly inspired by great Hong Kong cinema. So,
inspired and bring in experts from it.
Right, exactly.
This is, I think the American school that reaches this is Spielberg, right? Like a great action director, right? Everything is going to be perfect.
Producer on this film.
A producer on well, that's bullshit. Like,
I don't think so, because there's dinosaurs at the beginning of this and at the end of this. And if there's dinosaurs in your Hollywood blockbuster, Spielberg has to get a cut of that money.
I guess that's how it works. And then, not American, but someone like George Miller, right?
Sure.
With the Mad Max movies is like a genius when it comes to action. But like basically part of it is, and this is something that like people who are better at this stuff would point out, is it doesn't always, you can do a lot of cuts. You can have Hong Kong movies with lots of cuts, but they still know how to make it you can tell what's going on.
Right.
That's always the point. And bad choreography, it's CGI. You can do whatever you want. There's no reason for laziness. The only reason this sort of thing happens is when you have Hollywood actors who can't do the physical work. But it's all CGI. There's no reason for this. If you want an example of giant robots doing this right, you watch like Pacific Rim and Guillermo del Toro, who can shoot, So this is a movie, I think Age of Extinction is like the one where you can kind of tell what's going on. There's still ugly, overcomplicated designs. It's unbelievably how bad the Transformers work.
Oh, for sure. And it's a super low bar. I'm not saying this is good action. I'm just saying, hey, I can tell what the fuck is going on in a Michael Bay movie. That's a step up from previous Michael Bay movies and their action sequences, which is weird because he's like this blockbuster known as this action director. It's like, I've never really comprehended that.
But they're literally just movies you can go to and not pay attention. They're the lowest common denominator. They don't make sense. They're pastiches. I actually don't understand it. I've never talked. I think I want to do like an ethnographic research to understand this. The politics, we were talking about movies, basically in a certain sense, Hollywood blockbusters are now like solidly mainstream liberal in a sense, as opposed to reactionary, playing into the most reactionary elements of it, which doesn't mean they're not nationalistic, which doesn't mean that they don't make excuses for the military, which doesn't mean whatever, but like the culture shifted, whatever. In a sense, the Transformers movies are like the last franchise that's like kind of fucked. And I should take that back. The liberal stuff can actually be just as fucked. Really.
Right.
I think one of the things that I love about the Marvel movies is that a large number of them, including, I'll be honest, Black Panther, the original Iron Man, I think we've talked about this, have deep critiques of the military industrial complex embedded in them that they then contradict in the movie. So they just can't bring it home. But like these are movies that like are kind of reactionary at their heart. And it's kind of the last big blockbuster that actually does that.
The Age of Extinction, you mean?
Or just the Transformer, the
Oh
Bay,
yeah, I mean, again,
Bayan.
I didn't watch Last Night or Bumblebee, or I guess they're prepping another one, so like I couldn't speak to those. But
Well, Bumblebee somebody isn't Bay anymore, so that
right,
would
I just
be.
meant within the universe. Yeah,
Does here's the thing though, in this world of giant blockbusters, at least they have a voice, and his voice is very garbled and weird.
I I actually wrote down a note when I was watching this one about the politics in this one, because this is a, granted, it's a giant, transforming metal alien movie, but there's a political world in this film that I'm really struggling. I don't want to say the word interesting. That's just like a go-to phrase. That is, I was wondering if it was purposely convoluted. We did an episode, I believe, or we at least mentioned Red Scorpion, the Dolph Lundgren movie from the 80s, back in our catalog of episodes. We're like, why is this so like unnecessarily complicated about freedom fighters and Africa and the role that Russians have? Like, what the? I thought you were making just a shitty 80s action movie. What is going on here? And I kind of had the same thing with this one. As they were doing the exposition here, like the politics is all in like this exposition dump dialogue thing towards the beginning of the movie. And I was like, I feel like this is just designed to be confusing.
Yeah, well, it's a level of ineptitude,
Or it's just that. Yeah.
well, it is a level of ineptitude that you. I mean, this is the thing with Bay in general, Bay movies in general, is you really, like I was saying, you don't know if you're being fucked with or not.
Right.
Like you really can't tell, and you're probably not, but part of what's interesting about it is that it paints a deeply paranoid, terrifying world, I think, in a lot of ways.
It does. And it's also, we've already referenced 9/11 a couple of times. This is a 2014 movie. This is like a 13 years out kind. And I feel like they're aping it because, like, at the end of the previous movie, I get there was like this giant Transformers battle that destroyed Chicago. So, like, the billboards that you see are like, remember Chicago. Like, Chicago's there 9/11. It's like, remember Chicago, remember Chicago. There's CIA black ops that are hunting down, I guess, all Transformers, but like
all of them, yeah.
yeah. And you see, like, if it was a human, it'd be a rated R movie because, like, they just hunt down and, like, execute gangster style, CIA gangster style Transformer. They're like, holy shit, I didn't know we were going to be, we're doing this movie, I guess. But it just feels so late.
I mean, part of it is the laziness is feeding off of that stuff.
And that's what I was wondering. Is it sort of late in the game, or is it just like, this is a lazy shortcut to having like maybe seemingly a little bit of a political edge to the story?
I mean, the Obama years are the era of drone strikes and like increasing use of special forces.
Yeah.
As opposed to large land forces. So like, it kind of fits. But like, I think it's also just that, yeah, Hollywood feeds off of 9/11 for a really long time. I mean, you don't see like the waves of social movements or stuff they start to filter in a little bit. Certainly the effects of BLM, for instance, are felt in Hollywood films and in Hollywood as actual political battles. But like,
well, I mean, like at one point somebody has like a deck of cards, like the military did with the fucking like Iraq War in 2003. Somebody in this movie has a deck of cards of like the wanted Transformers out there. It was like, who is this for?
Oh, I didn't even catch that. Yeah, no, it's true. It's like they wrote it 10 years previously.
I mean, and we were both alive for it, obviously. So 2001, 9/11 happens. Was it because like 2011 was like the 10-year anniversary, and then a couple years later this movie comes out?
I don't think that. I think that's too much.
I'm assigning too much credit to thinking there. But oh my god, there also the number of American flags that are just worked into the background all the time.
Well, this is what I mean about the Americana element.
Yeah.
So it's like innovative patriarchal dad, but like struggling entrepreneur. Mind you, functionally have Stanley Tucci playing,
like an Elon Musk kind of.
No, he's not an Elon Musk because this is 2014. Yeah, he's playing Steve Jobs.
Oh, that's more appropriate for that. Yeah, you're right.
He's really playing Steve Jobs. And I'd actually like to segue into another political thing that actually is a little bit dated, but interesting and important in this period, which is the role of China in this film. So we already talked. Well, have we really talked about co-productions and all that?
Not in Blockbuster series here.
We should get into this because I think this is like a signature example of it, and then talk about the portrayal of China in this film.
Well, I think it's more of a portrayal in this one, and then we're going to get more into the actual like co-production when we get to the Fast movies.
Okay. So basically, this is a movie aimed at entering the Chinese market. You have a major Chinese actor sort of shoehorned in there practically as a love interest for your Steve Jobs character. Oh, you can deal with this at a particular metaphorical level, right? You have something that would never happen today in the post-Trump period, in which the one thing that the political ruling class of the United States agrees on is that we're in rival position with China, is the secret like other factory for like synthetic like human built transformers is in China.
Right.
Basically the cutting edge of US defense manufacturing is in China. Completely unbelievable today. Would never happen then either, frankly, but like still all of your Chinese characters are portrayed as in extremely positive lights. Nothing, no flaws in personality, whatever, forces for reason, wondering what these crazy Americans are doing. And then there's a battle in Hong Kong in which you have clips of Chinese, military officials and political figures saying we must defend Hong Kong. They describe it for its political designation that an American audience wouldn't really even get, because they wouldn't. Most Americans, no offense, probably don't know the status of the legal status of Hong Kong, which is is a little different than the mainland, though that's less so today. And the Chinese military shows up. They don't really do very much, but like in a completely positive light. This is completely unbelievable today. It wouldn't happen at this point, even though we're never going to make the Chinese villains in our films. It's never going to happen as long as the Chinese market is so huge.
Right.
When we talk about internationalization, China is really the story there. But the absolute, I'm going to just say pandering to the Chinese market in that way, in a way that sort of portrays a particular sort of politics. And it, at a metaphorical level, is showing the marriage of Chinese and American capitalism. I think that's actually what this movie, in a certain sense, portrays. I don't know. It's interesting, right? It's actually really.
Oh, yeah.
It's at the peak of people's awareness of Apple's supply chain operating out of China, of Foxconn, all of that stuff, right? And it's portrayed in this movie. It's in a positive light, but if you read it in that way, it's there as like a very representative of the moment that it's in. So I think that's actually pretty interesting. It doesn't really help the movie. I think as it's relatively organic, but as most of these things, it does feel shoehorned in. It's funny to say that about this movie, because that assumes there's any sort of coherence to it at all. But
there isn't. It's a Franken blockbuster, like you said, and it's put together in sequences that play out like movie trailers. And that allows you to be on your phone for fucking who knows however long a period of time, or go get a popcorn refill, or I'm going to take a leak, or I'm going to play a video game for 15 minutes, then I'll be back in the theater. And hey, guess what? I can basically keep up with the idea of like good guy, bad guy. Okay, I'm good.
Except the good guys aren't good at all. They're horrible. They basically just run around saying how much they want to kill people, including each other. Like, their bickering is not cute. It's literally, I want to kill people, and only Optimus Prime holds you together. It's wild. That is not even getting into, once again, Film Crit Hulk has actually an interesting essay on this that starts with the fact that there is an alien space vagina in a cage that gets murdered by John Goodman's all of Bay's weird shit is on screen. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that is actually the answer to the, like, what is going on with these. The reason these are hits is because they are the true lowest common denominator, and you don't need to pay attention.
Right. You don't have to. One thing that really stood out to me in this one, because Michael Bay, you're always on the lookout for like really shitty gender politics. You have Mark Wahlberg playing the protective dad, as we mentioned. And the first time he meets his daughter's boyfriend, who they have a house rule they're not supposed to date, or either one, not date each other, but clearly, like you said, there's some Oedipal things going on here pretty clearly. The new boyfriend to his daughter carries around the Romeo and Juliet law in his wallet to explain how they started dating when it was legal, even though the ages they are now, you're like, no, dude, that's going to work. It's almost like Bay just had the screenwriters write a scene to address criticism of objectifying Megan Fox in the first 2 Transformers movies.
I think you're right.
It's
Because
it's a very reactionary movie, and I don't think that part of it is exempt from Bay's reactionary elements. Also, at this point, you're like however many movies into a series, making billions of dollars. Whatever he says goes. Bay, I mean, in that case.
yeah, I think that's the only thing that makes sense of that, because I really didn't understand why you would wait. Why? I mean, obviously, wasting time is what they do, but like, we're just mean to this movie, but we should be. But like, why would you even have that entire subplot?
No, it doesn't make any sense, especially because Tessa Yeager, his Mark Wahlberg's daughter in the movie, is clearly over 18.
Yeah.
Like, there's never a moment there where I was like, oh, she's in high school? That's believable. I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So it's just, I don't know, it's another shoehorn thing in there. We need to move on because there's plenty of other stuff to get to in this time period. But there is one aspect that I actually did enjoy about Transformers Age of Extinction. Steve Jablonsky, who did the music for this, is clearly a huge fan of the Dark Knight soundtrack and the whole Christopher Nolan trilogy, because it is pounding drums. And I've seen like a couple of Bad Boys movies. I've seen one other Transformers movie. I've seen Armageddon. Actually, I watched Pain and Gain, which is maybe a topic for conversation, but it really hits all the beats you mentioned earlier about entrepreneurialism and Americana bullshit within Michael Bay's cinema. But his scores haven't sounded like this before. There's a chase scene early in the movie where the government, the goon squad from the CIA is coming to try to find Optimus Prime, and they're going to execute Mark Wahlberg and his whole family right there on the lawn if they don't give up, where Optimus Prime is. And the score goes for like a good 8 to 10 minute chunk where like it builds up throughout the whole scene. I was like, God, this score really pounds. This is really, really good. And it rises and it falls. There's crescendos, but it's really close to like the truck scene when the Joker is going after Batman and Heath Ledger has the rocket launcher in the underground chase sequence there in The Dark Knight, where you've got like the pounding percussion going and like it builds up and there's just a low rumble the whole. I don't know. It was strong Dark Knight vibes. And I texted a friend of mine who's a musician who loves the Dark Knight score and the Christopher Nolan scores in general usually. And I was like, hey, give a listen to this score. It's going to sound weird, but give a listen to this score. And he was like, oh my God, this is great. And then he watched Age of Extinction. He's like, this movie sucks ass, but that score really, really, it really hits. And I was like, okay, I didn't think I was wrong there. So I was like, okay, I've played it in the background a few times. So like I did get one good thing out of this movie.
Yeah. All right. I'll take that.
Score work. But
score.
Anyway,
it's a good score.
As we're talking about the way that Hollywood, I guess I'm going to, poorly comments on 9/11, because the era we're talking about, it's 99, 9/11 happens in 2001, and we're going through this era of blockbusters. Hollywood is processing 9/11, the war on terror, the Bush years. Isaac, what movie really is an exemplary example of processing the war on terror on screen?
Well, I'm going to say 300.
Be afraid! Sparta will burn to the ground! 1,000 nations of the Persian Empire descend upon you!
What must a king do to save his world?
Instead, ask yourself, what should a free man do?
Threaten my people with slavery and death!
This is madness!
Madness. This is Sparta! We will stand and fight!
A new age has begun. An age of freedom. And all who know that 300 Spartans give their last breath to defend it.
Now, is 300 a blockbuster? I think so.
It's one of those that I think culturally feels like a blockbuster to me.
It's deeply influential. It's right on the line. I mean, in terms of size, it also introduces. I mean, it's number 10 at the box office. It's a blockbuster. but like on the edge there. It's also, I think it doesn't introduce, it's not, Zack Snyder's first movie, but I think in a sense it's the one that introduces us to his aesthetic.
Yeah. What did he do? He did Dawn of the Dead before this?
He does Dawn of the Dead before this, which is still his best movie.
And it doesn't have a lot of the 300 aesthetic.
It doesn't have any of it.
Right.
It's really not. I mean, I've only seen it once. It's been a long time. But like, there's people who think that's better than the original, which is not true.
Well, no, that's not true. But anyway, 300.
300. So part of what's interesting about 300 is, yeah, I mean, he introduces to his aesthetic and his style, which is the most style over substance thing in a way that's parallel to, similar to Bay, but I actually think he's a much, much superior visualist. You know, Snyder actually makes pretty things and interesting things. But yes, it all looks like a music video, or it all looks, in the same way that you're saying, or it all looks like trailers, right? Is it coherent? He's not a good storyteller. He doesn't choose his storytelling film modes, like, whatever, needle drops or slow-mo or whatever, in a way that accentuates the story he's trying to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So, but as a filmmaker, it's still striking. It is unique, and weird. 300, it's interesting. There's a vast amount of racism in American film. I think we've covered a lot, but this might be one of the most racist films we've done.
I wish I had rewatched it.
Because it is filled with every goddamn Orientalist trope I can think of, which has been filtered through centuries of Western portrayals of the Greek wars with the Persians, which purely are based on Greek accounts of what happened. Note, it's bullshit. Not total. I mean, they win, technically, but it's way more complicated. The numbers are totally different. This isn't historically accurate at all. It's so, just basically the Persians are not human. They're either effete and weak, or the ones that seem even moderately strong are literal physical monsters. Xerxes is portrayed in a way, I don't know, he's both, you have sort of this weird sort of like, I don't want to call it Fu Manchu, but like, I don't know where all these come from, but he combines both jewelry, which is probably derived from both, let's say, appropriated from both Indian and maybe African influences, with like a bald head that you sort of associate with weird, creepy Orientalist tropes. He in himself, in his design, is deeply racist and totally inaccurate and weird. Both combining sort of this femininity with a really deep voice and being huge. It's very strange, and it's very out in the open. There is, it very much plays into maybe what's even in the original Greek sources of the, this brown horde facing off against basically, what are Ubermensch, right? In a like a Nazi sense, like, or when not just Nazi sense, but like, what are these Ubermensch Greeks who are both vastly physically superior, vastly more intelligent, fascistic in the way that they are trained, like the deep violence and brutalization that turns them into what they are, into these perfect fighting machines, that this is good, combined with democracy, combined with rationality. We keep making reference to Greek rationality, and that this is actually a battle between superstition and rationality, which we see none on display, to be clear.
Right.
All of this is there. It is so out in the open. It's absolutely out in the open, unvarnished. Every one of these tropes is there. It's incredible. If you watch this movie today, it's from 2007. It's actually kind of incredible to watch. So, it's, yeah, I mean, the literal monsterization. This is the Persian Empire. It's vast. It goes all the way up to at least Egypt, and probably the borders of like the Indus Valley, or like areas that would be in India historically. But there seemed to be a lot of Africans there, which, mind you, was fine. There's nothing wrong with having black actors in the film, but I actually don't think that's what's going on. I think it's racist because they're barbarians. And I think that's intentional. You have more black characters in this to portray a brown and black horde invading rational Europe. It's not an accident. And it's part of civilizational narratives that go back to at least the Enlightenment, right? And are derived from Greek sources, even if the Greek cultural and historical context is vastly different. I mean, there's no Europe at the time of the ancient Greeks. It doesn't exist as a political, social, whatever entity. Yeah, no, it's worth rewatching. All of this is derived from a Frank Miller comic. I assumed Frank Miller, one of the most famous and influential comic writers of all time, famous for his run on Daredevil, which I still like a great deal. Then The Dark Knight Returns, which Snyder would attempt to partially adapt for Batman v Superman, but as usual with him, completely missing any of the context and then just showing some of the imagery from it as a nostalgia kick. Completely ineffective as a cinematic maneuver, because without the emotional content, imagery doesn't mean shit. Right. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't matter if you have a cool image without some sort of emotional anchor to it. So, you see him, but the thing about Frank Miller is that I always thought that 9/11, I haven't read a lot of his 90s stuff. I thought 9/11 broke his brain. This is somebody famous for doing Batman who attempted post 9/11 to make a comic in which Batman like murders Osama bin Laden.
Oh, really?
And, yes. And DC wouldn't let him. They basically, no, we're not going to publish this. And so he published it on his own as a book called Holy Terror, in which a Batman pastiche and a Catwoman pastiche fight Al-Qaeda, literally, I believe. So that's where this guy is. But the comic this is based on, and it's very much perfectly, very much the imagery is directly from the comic, which is the other thing that Snyder does when he does this. He does this with Watchmen. None of the content of Watchmen makes sense in a Snyder movie, but he'll copy the images without understanding them, I think. But basically, this was actually a comic from like 1998. So he'd already gone this far, right? He'd already gone this far in that direction by 1998. He was already like a right-wing nutball. So this is, I think, one of the most interesting political blockbusters we've covered, and I think it's one of the most interesting political blockbusters of the 2000s. But it's horrific. I think you can see it as part of the tail end of the influence of Gladiator, basically. Of Gladiator's a big hit, so people try to copy.
Oh, yeah.
And I think
that was the way it was marketed for sure.
Absolutely.
I mean, it wasn't like, hey, like Gladiator, but like if you look at this trailer, the 300 trailer, and knowing Gladiator, like it's 100%. You're like, okay, we're gonna get this crowd for sure.
And part of it, they literally do the Elysium grain scene from Gladiator. They rip it off directly.
Well, that's what he's good at doing. I would say a lot of what you were talking about with like having the visuals without any like substance to it. We'll probably get to it eventually at some point, but like that was one of my main complaints with the more recent Joker film.
Yeah. I
did not having watched 300, but I having seen that one a couple of times, I was like, oh, that was most of my complaints. Like, just because you're referencing other movies that were better than your movie doesn't mean that you get, it doesn't help your narrative. Like, do the work.
Well, it's just because you're adapting a comic doesn't mean that you've successfully captured why the comic book works.
Right.
Doing image for image does not help you.
Right.
We have a century of film adaptations of novels that could tell us that.
100%. Have you read the comic that this is based on, or the graphic novel?
Most of it a long time ago. I read it in college.
Okay. Did your feelings of like the comic itself, like does that, the problems that you have with 300 the movie, are those there on the page as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think they're absolutely there. I mean, I have to look again. I'm not going to 100% that, but yeah, no, I think that's the thing, is it's direct adaptation. I think it is there on the page. I don't know how Zack Snyder feels about all this. He may be directly translating. I don't know. This is the other element of this is like the trends in blockbusters is, you know, before Marvel dominance and DC and the sort of like centering on universes, really up until like Marvel wins basically, and then the Dark Knight sort of changes the game. You have a lot of floundering because you're realizing that these superhero movies are working, but you're not sure what to do. So like Sin City also, which is pretty successful.
Oh, yeah.
That's Sin City, and then, you know, so basically Frank Miller has a Hollywood period where Sin City is his stuff, right? You can tell when you think about it, and all of them like this one. And then there's The Spirit, which is actually a Will Eisner comic from the 40s. But, you know, Frank Miller like partially or maybe actually directs the movie. It's horrible, but like he's really into it. But they all do this sort of like surreal, ultra not style. Like, I mean, Sin City, I think successfully does a lot of what so in a certain sense, I think that I just realized this is that Zack Snyder is actually getting his aesthetic from what Frank Miller movies are looking like in this period.
Frank Miller. Oh, the movies themselves, you're saying? The movie versions of Frank Miller comics.
Yeah, like Sin City is like basically rips its aesthetic from his art. The characters don't look like human beings. They look like caricature. They look like comic book characters. It's a tendency. It's a sub-tendency within superhero movies, which has died out completely. But at that point, they're trying to figure out what's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so for these movies, they do this. And they're R-rated, right? Like these are really R-rated movies. But I just realized, what year did Sin City come out? 2005.
Okay.
So a couple years before. So you're doing the thing that Sin City did.
Yeah.
God, his whole aesthetic is based off of this. Like what he becomes famous for is based off of just trying to literally put the comic book on the screen, which he didn't even do first. It's
I mean, not to I don't do like devil's advocate here because I'm not a fan of his work, but like that is what you should do if you're doing a comic book or graphic novel. I mean, he does Watchmen after this.
Yeah.
And like I get it because like if nothing else, if you're going to do a true adaptation of a comic book, like the comic book is your storyboard. Like,
but
I mean, obviously you can't just do that. Otherwise, like every comic book movie would work.
You can't just do it. Well, part of it is this: you're copying the imagery. You're not copying the story or content.
So right.
So that's part of the problem. Is like I haven't watched his Watchmen since theaters, but if I remember correctly, he doesn't get the story.
Mm-mm. Like no, I just watched it a couple months ago because we watched the HBO spinoff series and we're like, well, let's go back and watch the original one. And we watched the official Snyder director's cut on Blu-ray, and we're just like, and also I reread the graphic novel before watching the HBO one, so I was like fairly, steeped in it. I was just like, there's no, I mean, it's a phrase I don't like to like lean back on, but just for the sake of quick commentary here, like there doesn't have the heart.
Yeah.
I don't know. You don't feel it there, but
I think it doesn't have the heart. He doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't know how to get, like, that's why a TV show sequel is actually what gets Watchmen.
Right.
Because writers actually understand the political content of Watchmen. So
right. And the themes they're exploring in the same, we'll use that sandbox term again. Like, oh, you get it. This is new. And it's another, like, it's a continuation of it, but like, it's pretty clear you get it.
Right. And, that would be a whole discussion in itself. But here is this weird ass movie, which is so influential and so sort of big. And I think is deeply fascistic. I mean, in its portrayal of what its heroes are, right? In its portrayal of the way that brutality and, it's so much there. At the same time, they're like sort of claiming this American democracy as well. Yeah, we don't have to keep talking about it, but it just kind of blew my mind. It feels like I don't know where its influence landed. I don't think it's lasted, but like it's getting relatively old now. But like it had a lot of influence for a while.
Yeah, it was very influential for a while there. I feel like I do want to ask you one more question though before we move on. Because the nature of the show we have here and all that, Zack Snyder is on record in a, I grabbed a quote from it's a 2001 interview with The Guardian. I don't have a right-wing political agenda. People see what they want to see. He talks about I vote Democrat. I'm a pretty liberal guy. He endorsed Joe Biden for the presidency in 2020. Are you seeing that in his films? Do you buy that? Like, what's the reaction there?
Well, part of it is you watch, what was that zombie movie?
Army of the Dead?
Army of the Dead that came out. You know, there's critiques of Trumpian themes and things in there. It's not a good movie. It's fine. It's not great, but it's fine. But like, there's a lot of your border wall imagery there, right? Like, there's a lot of anti-ICE imagery. That's all there. I believe him. I think he doesn't know, and there are people who will defend him and say that he knows what he's doing, and based off of that interview, and I get that, but like, then the only conclusion I have is that he has no idea what he's doing.
Or just, in any walk of life, you're gonna have people that just aren't that good at their job. Maybe that's him here. Or not consistently good at their job. Maybe, like, oh, hey, this one is okay. This one,
I can't remember where somebody argued he should be a DP.
Yeah. I think we were talking about that, not on mic, but about how, like, maybe Michael Bay would be better in, like, the effects department.
Right.
Or, like, why do you have to be the director, or, something, yeah, like, or I don't know if you know, the cinematographer chops or not, but yeah, that's a good question.
But Snyder is an interesting one because you can call him a blockbuster auteur in a sense, even though I don't think he makes good ones, in which
he's developed his own style, though, that like, oh, that's a Zack Snyder shot or sequence or whatever. The same way Bay has, like, oh, that's maybe they should be working. Those two should be working at the same company that makes trailers for movies.
Right. Here's the thing, though, is like, he's a very important director in sort of the pop culture wars, right? Because of what happened with Justice League.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's also been in the comic book world, comic book adaptation world for most of his career.
Right. It's where he's been. But like the Snyder cut, which I have not watched because life is short, and is the fact that DC gave into, I think this may be unfair, but I think a very similar part of the fan base to the ones that
with Star Wars.
Yeah, I think it's a very similar part of the fan base, and this is the part of the fan base that like Joker becomes catnip or what, because this is art. We have to have it be serious. It's serious art. We're watching serious movies, and it's like, and that means they're not funny, because if they're funny, I mean, it's 13-year-old, Randy and kids, even if they're 40, like they don't understand what serious storytelling is. All right, I'll say this: Taika Waititi, and I'm borrowing this from Sid Haint's analysis, but I think he's right. His Thor movie, has a more serious set of anti-colonial themes than anything in any Snyder movie. It is more artistically ambitious in its themes than any of them.
Mm-hmm.
Right there, out in the open, right there. But because it's funny, none of those assholes are going to notice.
Right.
Because that's not how the language of cinema works. But they really, and here it was, right? You actually make it. And because it meets the low bar of not being a Franken blockbuster that's clearly not finished, which is what the original Justice League was, somehow it's better. And that's trash. That's I think a dangerous thing for the industry in general, that's what not only do you give into that part of the fan base, but this is the standards that you're operating with. Is like, congratulations, the editing was like at a professional level.
Right.
Whatever you can say for Marvel, that's never happened with one of their movies. They'll never release a movie that's that unfinished. It's not going to happen.
Or haven't so far.
They haven't. So I think they would be in real trouble if they did, but I don't think they would ever let it happen. I think their machine is way too tight to ever let that go through.
Well, at a certain point, it's going to change hands, and there's going to be
problems.
But anyway, yeah, no, that's just speculation territory. But, well, Zack Snyder may outwardly say he's not a, right winger or overt fascist, but one person who I think pretty clearly is Mel Gibson. And he had it still boggles my mind. This is one of the weirdest blockbusters I've come across in doing any kind of Blockbuster research is The Passion of the Christ from 2004. So the follow-up to that is then, what makes this so weird that it's a blockbuster? Well, in 2004, it's not weird that Mel Gibson made a movie. I feel it's weird now, although he's infinitely more fascinating to me now that he's outed as like a crazy right-wing racist lunatic. But you have a movie that's in Aramaic, Latin, and Hebrew that's obviously overtly religious. It's about Jesus. And it goes on to make $600+ million worldwide at the box office. As we said earlier, the majority of that was in America. $30 million movie in a foreign language to American audiences. Well over two, or not well over, but it's over 2 hours long. It's specifically religious. It's about the last 12 hours in the life of Jesus. So it has so many things where like, okay, well, this is, if you make 30 million, good luck. Maybe. It's noted as the highest Christian film of all time. Goes on to crack $600 million at the box office. I should say too, speaking as an atheist, the Christian film market fascinates me, and I love me some shitty Christian films. But this movie isn't operating in the space that the normal Christian films are, because they'll pull punches and maybe be a PG-13 at the most. Every once in a while, you'll get the random rated R one. I don't think PureFlix ever puts out like a rated R film specifically, because it's always just family-friendly entertainment, which is one of the reasons why I find this movie morally reprehensible, which I'll get into in just a second. But this one we went to see in theaters. As a good atheist, I bought tickets for a different film. This is 2004, so there weren't assigned seats. And then we went into this theater because I wasn't giving Mel Gibson any of my money. And I went and saw it with myself, my partner Kelly, and then two friends of ours. And the first thing that hit me in the face was this was a sold out show on the second weekend that it came out, because the quote unquote grassroots publicity for this movie was getting congregations and parishes or whatever to go see this movie. You've got to go see this movie. I am baffled by the fact that this is a rated R movie, when if this was not about Jesus, this movie would be NC-17 for sure. Which that's a whole separate thing. Like, okay, yeah, because it's, not officially a Christian nation, but it is. Jesus is a big deal. So anybody at the rating system, they're going to give this movie a rated R. Have you seen this one, Isaac?
I saw it many, many years ago as a bootleg version at a friend's house. So I really need to watch it again. I'll tell you, I mean, one of these days we should talk about like the complexity of the term atheist. I mean, I'm not religious at all. I guess I would, it's sort of, part of it in the post period of like the new atheist movement of like the early 2000s, where it turns out most of them are actually fascists as well. Basically, if you're dealing with Dawkins or Hitchens or any, I'm not Hitchens isn't a fascist, but like they all turn out to be really shitty. I always feel, I'm not anti-religious at all. Like I don't find it to be useful. What's really fascinating about, what's really funny about this movie being the biggest Christian movie of all time, at the peak of the Christian right, in the Bush years, is the reason. And I think this, I'm not Catholic, so I should be really careful with this. Is it's super Catholic. So you got all these evangelical, like that's what dominates the Christian film market, right? When we talk about the Christian film market, we're talking about the evangelical film market and their subculture. But this is explicitly Catholic. What they're playing with, they're following the Stations of the Cross, which is explicitly Catholic. And I would bet you 90% of the Protestants watching this have no idea that's what they're getting.
No.
And the sheer level of blood and masochism, I don't want to say that's a more of a Catholic thing, but like, honest to God, like it's just, because that's what, the thing about Gibson is he's like a heterodox Catholic. He's like a hyper right wing.
Yeah.
I think he's from one of the sects that's like against the Vatican at this point, right? And it's just, it's wild in itself that like they just want a movie about Jesus that's big. That's all it takes. It's like the fact that they don't care about babies after they're born, right?
Oh, for sure. And this movie, I meant from an atheist standpoint, like I'm against organized religion because there's lots of child raping, there's subjugation of women, minority, all that stuff. I haven't read Hickens. I haven't read Dawkins. My partner, Kelly, she's read all that stuff and, doesn't like most of them either because it's people. Anyway, that's a separate conversation. That doesn't have anything to do with the film.
Right.
So I don't think this movie even really has an appreciation for its main character. It's just pure sadism and watching Jesus for 12 hours just get tortured. I mean, it's an extended torture porn film because I'm coming in from the standpoint of like, oh, I know Jesus. I haven't read the Bible. I, grew up vaguely Methodist, but not really. And then I was like, okay, I know the basic cultural story of Jesus, I guess. Pretty sure it's not a white dude with blue eyes, although they put contacts in his eyes in this movie, so they're brown. But still, Jim Caviezel's not selling Jesus to me here. I mean, he's selling me the, greeting card version of, Jesus in America, I guess.
Irish Jesus.
Yeah, Irish Jesus, right. And I was like, okay, skin tones don't really match up. Although luckily for the most part of this movie, his skin tone is red because he's bloody the whole time. But at the same time, this movie is boring. It's so boring. It takes forever to happen and it's all slow motion and different film speeds. And it doesn't take the time to give you any emotional connection to your protagonist. Unless you know the ins and outs of like Jesus' story. There's a couple flashbacks where apparently Jesus invented the table.
I remember that. That is wild.
What is, or the taller table, I guess, is what he actually invents there. And I know Mary Magdalene's a character. I mean, I know a little more than that. Sorry, I'm being a little too glib with it. But like, there's these little flashbacks where like I could see in the crowd as I was watching this that people were just like, oh, and I was like, oh, you're getting some out of this. What am I missing here? Because like the movie isn't giving it to me. The other problem, and where most of my problems really started with this movie is back watching in the theater, is the theater was full, not completely full, but it was all families. There were dozens and dozens of children watching this film in a theater. Second weekend it was going on. And I specifically remember it because we were sitting off to the left-hand side when you're looking at the screen, doesn't really matter, but I was on the aisle, and directly across the aisle from me was a girl who couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old.
Jesus
And
Christ.
3 or 4 times during the movie, the parents that were there, no, that's appropriate for this movie, I think. The parents that were with them, I'm assuming it was the parents, kept saying like, no, you need to see this. Hey, look at the screen. Hey, no, you need to see this. And I was like, I don't want to fucking watch this. There are actually, I even reached out on Twitter to a few folks, and I got a couple of responses back of my parent made me watch this in theaters when I was 5 years old, and I'm still scarred. Watched it when I was a kid because my parents had it on DVD and they made me watch it every Easter. So yeah, fuck this movie. My best friend's parents took him to see this movie on opening weekend when he was 7 years old, but wouldn't let him watch Pokemon because it was too violent. And then my favorite one was a buddy of mine from film school. It was his cousin said that his cousin's priest showed him this film in his 2nd grade class in the basement of the church without telling teachers or parents.
Jesus Christ.
Second graders. This is like, I mean, it's almost like snuff film level. Like this is damaging people. And there's no redeeming quality to this whatsoever.
Yeah.
You don't get an emotional connection to the character whatsoever. It's a basic storytelling thing. Also, without getting too, I mean, honestly, this was the way you were saying with 300. This one was like, we could really dig into this as a politics of cinema show. Violence is so tricky. And I get that. And I've watched a ton, like 2000 Maniacs we talked about during or Bucket of Blood or whatever we talked about during our 60s one. We're like Herschel Gordon Lewis. I love me some great like shitty grindhouse movies or even quality grindhouse movies actually from the late 60s and 70s. But violence is really, really tricky. You can use it to be very viscerally effective in your storytelling. I would say see Barry Jenkins' Underground Railroad series. Amazing use of violence. And I mean that very sincerely because it's in the hands of an artist who's doing something with it. It's part of the story. This movie is just more like, I don't even know what's the right word, like hack demagogue, propagandist, like, and it was like, yeah, I'm not on board with what you're selling here at all. I honestly kind of thought of Rambo a lot because we were talking about Rambo in our 80s episode. And I hadn't looked at Rambo the way I do now before talking to you about it. And because also you watched more of them than I did and had some great analysis of it. But it's like, it's a form of like violence as sadism but also when it's attached to what somebody thinks is a moral compass. I think that's maybe where I'm really like, whoa, that's disturbing to me. What are you doing here? Also, this movie is wildly anti-Semitic and really just gross.
Very that's the least surprising thing in the world, right?
Right. And because it's on the Zack Snyder tip, it's designed for maximum impact. Everything is a trailer scene. It's slow-mo. It's the music. It's the lighting. It's the angelic choruses. It's the, oh my God, this is like the moment, right? And when I rewatched it for the show, I rewatched it with the commentary track on, where it was Mel Gibson, I think the cinematographer, and a quote unquote religious expert, which wasn't really picking apart some of the flaws. You can read tons of stuff about, like, yeah, that's not right. Yeah, that's not right. At one point, they were debating some text that they read about historical analysis of the Bible to determine how much blood Jesus had lost on his way to being crucified. Like, this is what they were fascinated by.
So my dad always refers to that sort of thing as the Bible as a cookbook. But that's like the Bible is like a really gross cookbook.
Yeah.
I guess. So I had not thought, when you put it this way, I had not thought about it quite in those terms of, as, you know, it's in the realm of it's your Jesus camp dynamics. That's what this movie is.
Yeah.
As a form of abuse, as a form of the hypocrisies of the religious right, and in many ways that are apocalyptic and deeply violent imagery, which is perfectly fine while they, you know, attack popular culture or whatever is worldly. But I know I hadn't thought about it that way. And of course, yeah, I mean, it's going to be deeply anti-Semitic. I assume it's mainly based off of John, you know, not the earlier Gospels when the early Christians are really Jews. Like, there's a very clear, you know, you have the Synoptic Gospels, and then you have the fourth one where it's like, you know, where you have John, which a lot of evangelicals, I think, like more, where it's very clear that the early Christians have broken off, and frankly, they're probably being persecuted by the majority of Jews. They're not Jews anymore. There's a transition. I'm not a biblical scholar. It's been a long time. But like, yeah, no, I think that analysis makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a deeply reactionary movie by somebody really at the fringes of the part of what's interesting is like, from friends and people who are deep more in sort of the Catholic world, like there's been a lot of building up linkages and things between like the Catholic right and sort of the Protestant right, the evangelical right in the United States and elsewhere, but like the United States specifically. Mm-hmm. But the reality is the Catholic right is pretty different in their culture. Catholicism is different. And, you know, it takes on the attributes of Catholicism and its differences with Protestantism. But it's interesting that this brings them together so effectively in their worst aspects.
Right.
and you know, I was just thinking about what are the best movies about biblical themes. And to me, it's a certain movie by Martin Scorsese.
I'll say Last Temptation of Christ definitely comes to mind. And I almost put it on the other night just as like, okay, I need a palate cleanser. You can do this story effectively, and even for a non-Christian audience.
Well, it's extra biblical, but part of it is, you know, it's not like based off of the Bible, but part of it is that whenever Scorsese goes after religious themes, he's wrestling with them and taking them seriously.
Right.
He's trying to engage with them. And I feel this way about Aronofsky as well.
Yeah. I can see that.
I think you could say that about Mother. And I think my personal like goofball fave is Noah.
Oh God.
We'll
talk about that later.
Talking about but the thing is this, he's taking it seriously, right?
Yeah, no, I'll give you that.
And I'm just a side note, it was one of my most satisfying things because he's using Jewish traditions that are extra biblical for Christians, but they're Jewish traditions to tell the story of Noah as basically a fantasy movie. And you've got evangelicals freaking the fuck out because they think this is their story, but you know what? It's not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think part of it is this the strangest blockbuster that we've covered?
I think that we've covered for sure, just because like the everything I mentioned up top, that it was like, I forgot this was so fucking huge. And then they even did a quote unquote edited version that came out a little while later, which you were like, okay, you just want more money. I get it, whatever. But no, it was weird. But then also because it became such a kind of, you know, phenomenon, as it were, without like it wasn't like Titanic where it held number one for X number of weeks or did whatever. It was more just expectation versus what it actually delivered on at the box office and in the audience response to it. But also, if you've got the Christian base in America going nuts for some movie and really plugging it, that's going to drive a certain amount of media coverage anyway and make it seem okay. It goes back again. I think it was more of it is a legit blockbuster. Like you got a $30 million religious movie that grosses over 600 worldwide. That's legit blockbuster territory. Also, it got nominations for like makeup, cinematography, maybe effects or score or something like that. I forget. But because it kind of came from nowhere and was like, holy shit, this thing is huge, it got even more publicity. The same way like The Sixth Sense. Like that wasn't expected to be a blockbuster. That was expected to just be like maybe a solid movie, I hope, that Bruce Willis made. And then it becomes something else. So.
How does it play? Like, thinking back on the years that this came out, this is our peak, in a sense, the peak of the political power of the Christian right and the peak of their power politically or culturally, right?
I think so. Yeah. Movie wise. So I was just looking it up. It beat out Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. It beat out The Incredibles. It beat out Day After Tomorrow at the box office. Like it was just below Spider-Man 2 and barely.
Wow.
In the North American box office for 2004. So yeah, I think it earns the mantle of weirdest.
We've lost our way as a nation. We really have. That was the peak when Jesus could bring you to the theaters.
Yeah. Yeah. Again and again and again. And be a church. It could be a youth group field trip for your third grade class at church.
Yeah. To traumatize them all the more. That's the thing is, I'll just say this, like this stuff is, how people are kept in, is through to a certain degree trauma, right? Like the fear of hell is an underlying thing. And obviously religion is more complicated than this, the things that, but like as an underlying backstop, a fear of hell and the uncertainty, even once you've left, of whether it exists or not is, is a horrible, horrible tool of control.
Yeah. And it's in the long run. Yeah. It's a movie. It pales in comparison to generations of child rape and trafficking and subjugation and all the violence that religion, specifically Catholicism and Christian religions, have done over the years. But that's not the only violent religious sect. It's obviously not that important, but at the point we're looking at with blockbusters and the way that this movie popped up and just became such a thing, you're like, wait, what? And then, I was in one theater in, Cleveland area in 2004 watching this movie and was like, I think I'm seeing like trauma being inflicted on children right now. And that was just at one showing on, one night in one theater in one town.
Yeah.
Fuck. No wonder, 10 plus years later, there's a whole bunch of fans waiting to see Human Centipede in the theater, which I'd gladly watch all that trilogy again before watching this movie again.
Wow.
Those movies are doing like that's what you're getting. That's to be expected. Like this is an exploitation snuff film disguised as like, oh, it's a religious experience to go watch. No, it's not.
I actually don't feel totally qualified to understand the full psychology of what this does.
What do you mean what this does?
What people get out of watching basically a Christian snuff film.
Oh, sure. I was rereading some nonsense of Mel Gibson in prep for this because I was just like, oh my God, are you serious? And he talks about how he wants it to be shocking and he wants it to be extreme and he wants people to see the enormity of Jesus' sacrifice, blah, blah, blah. And then he always couches, I read like 2 or 3 interviews of it. One he did with Diane Sawyer, I think was where this one came from, where he talks about like, the actual crucifixion was even more violent than was shown in the film. Like that's his out. Like it's still like, anyway, let's move on. There's fast movies we can talk about.
Let's talk about something fun.
Yeah.
Something lighthearted. Something which is interesting and weird political import. Let's talk about the fast movies.
Sullivan.
Are you crazy? Do you know whose money are you stealing?
We ain't stealing that.
All right, listen up. The men we're after are professional runners. We find them, we take them as a team, and we bring them back. And above all else, we don't ever let them get in the cars.
Home sweet home.
This just went from Mission Impossible to Mission of freaking Sanity.
Stick to the plan. If you're gonna survive, stop thinking like a cop. You're in my world now.
So we watched these as erratically. We thought as erratically as we watched the Transformers movies, but actually we synced up pretty well.
Yeah, I think so.
Because I'd seen the first one. I don't think I saw the second one. I thought the third one was pretty fun. But this is that franchise where, like, it doesn't matter really what you saw at the start of it.
Right.
You picked up with 5, and you watched 6 previously. And then we both watched 7 and 8 separately?
I didn't watch... So I watched 5. I've seen the first one. I've seen 6, but it was a while back. And then I watched 5 and 7 for this.
Okay, and I watched 7 and 8.
Because this is an accidental franchise, right? It was never supposed to be what it was. The first one is a Point Break ripoff. And then the next up to 4 are basically unconnected as far as I understand. And then 5 is what turns it into an ongoing franchise.
Yeah, yeah. Wait. Point Break ripoff?
Oh, totally. Like, because the first one is basically he's infiltrating a gang, except it's like motorcycle. It's just cars instead of surfing.
Yeah. Okay, that works. Interesting. I looked at them as a ripoff of the Sean Penn movie State of Grace with Gary Oldman.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen that one or not. But yeah, those both work because it's still like infiltrate. Oh, I kind of maybe spoiled a little bit of State of Grace there. You don't realize that there's a cop infiltrating a gang in State of Grace till the halfway point. You're like, oh fuck, that person's a cop, which is kind of what I think they were trying to pull off in the first Fast movie. But anyway, yeah, no, credit to Justin Lin, which is again, like you said, accidental franchise. It's so fascinating that because like he had a pretty substantial art house hit with Better Luck Tomorrow in 2002. And then he gets the keys to the Fast at that point franchise or trilogy or who knows what they were doing with Tokyo Drift, which is largely now considered to be like, oh, that's like the redheaded stepkid of the Fast franchise.
Though a lot of people think it's the best, right?
It's pretty awesome. It's pretty kick-ass for like a blockbuster action car movie. Like there's some great car sequences in that one that are coherent and really well done. But like he's the guy who comes back in with Fast 5 to start steering the ship the right direction, and then also apparently back in with number 9 from what I've read about like, oh, okay, we're back on track now. Like he's the guy who keeps coming into like, I'm trying to think of a car metaphor here to steer the car in the right direction or to the right lane. But yeah, it's kind of fascinating that this ended up being a gigantic worldwide franchise.
It really is. It's the weirdest of all these. It's the only one that's original.
Oh yeah, like I see what you mean. Yeah, like it's not based on a comic book or some 70s movie or a book or anything.
Or an 80s toy line.
I forgot about that. That has to be in the repertoire now.
And it, so like that makes it really interesting. Here's what's really hard for me about these movies. They're everything that I should like in junk. But I don't
like them.
They just don't really connect. And yeah, I don't know why.
I'm with you.
But like, you know what I mean? It's like, this is everything I should like, right? Like I'll say this actually. And well, not only that, so we're talking about representation wars, right? Part of it is these are movies with some really interesting representational stuff going on, right?
That's true.
Like basically long before sort of Hollywood culture wars or any of this stuff happened, they're doing it. Right?
Yeah.
These are super diverse movies. And I think that might be sort of why they catch on to a certain degree, right? They look like America of today.
Yeah.
They look like a country which our latest census data came out, which is slightly less than 58% white. So that's really impressive in a certain sense. I mean, we can talk about the limits of representation. I already talked about this. But, you know, it actually does, you know, it's not a bad thing. The problem with it is, so like Fast Five is like a pretty good heist movie. And it's the one where the whole family thing, right, works the best. The dynamic, it's like this is an overly elaborate heist that doesn't totally work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like shit pulls together. You know what I mean? Like the characterization and the dynamics, the fun that you have with the characters pulls you through. Fast 7 doesn't do that for me because by Fast 7, it's basically just, you know, James Bond level spy stuff. It's really absurd. And I realize that's the point, and that's what people enjoy, right? And I get that. I totally understand that. It just doesn't land for me. It should, but it doesn't.
That also has a Robin Hood aspect to it too, doesn't it? Aren't they like stealing money from some corrupt corporate asshole?
No.
Oh, I thought that was like I thought the heist in that one was like some rich corrupt business guy.
Oh, Fast 5 is that. Fast 5, they're stealing from the biggest gang lord in, I think, Sao Paulo, maybe?
Yeah,
like
in Brazil. Yeah.
But he's got a lot of legit power. So like part of it is his actual, this is how absurd this is. Things are so corrupt that all of his drug money, like, is held in a safe that's in a police station, and that's what they have to steal it from.
Oh, okay.
And the famous real life, they're actually, as I understand it, you know, there's no CGI or whatever. Them dragging a safe through the straight is, you know, Brazilian city, like that's. I don't think it's São Paulo. I can't remember. That's in that movie. So I think that's the one where they're doing that. There's a certain a little more Robin Hood aspect of it.
Rio.
It's Rio. Okay.
Yeah.
Rio de Janeiro. But like Fast 7, it's not. It's just it's weird spy stuff. I mean, it's the one where they add Jason Statham in.
Oh yeah, that's the one I watched.
Oh, I thought you watched 8.
No, I watched 7 and 8. No, 7 was the one where I watched that one, and it to me, I was like, I don't understand everybody's got their own little roles to play. Like, why is Tyrese the comic relief? Like, he's not funny. Like, and I guess his role is just like, I'm the comic relief. Like everybody, you know, Luda's, you know, the hacker guy, like, you know, everybody has their roles to play. And that one really boggled my mind. But then also watching Furious 7, Furious 7, I was like, I don't understand why these are Bollywood musicals. They just don't have dance numbers because Hollywood doesn't have the balls to just, you know, put in a dance number. Like Vin Diesel clearly wants to dance in a movie. Just let him fucking dance in a movie. Tyrese can sing and dance and rap. Like Ludacris is in the movie. Like just do it. Why didn't Ludacris get a soundtrack song the way Will Smith had all through the 90s?
And the truth is, they tend to have good soundtracks, so just use it.
Right. And if you can direct an action sequence, you can direct a dance sequence. Also, like that was the thought, like there's a scene here where like Tyrese is like playing the distraction guy in Abu Dhabi while there's like trying to steal a car or a microchip or who gives a shit. And I was like, he's doing this like comic relief on a microphone guy or a comic relief in a microphone. Like, oh, we got a birthday here. And he's interrupting like this like wealthy, like as a prince or whatever is his party. I was like, that guy, Tyrese would already be disappeared. And like, they let him do his shtick for like way too long. Like you get a big Bollywood dance number going. I'm buying it. It.
I will just say, so that's a Jordanian prince. And, that's completely inaccurate. Jordan is not that wealthy. So the king of Jordan, I actually looked up his net worth. I suspected it wasn't that high. Jordan doesn't have oil. It has like potash and stuff. So he actually, you know, the king of Jordan has less than $1 billion. He has like 700 and something million.
He's heir to that sweet potash throne. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so basically, you know, you would have had to. I don't know why they didn't choose like some, you know, like a wealthy like Gulf, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, probably why you don't want to piss off some money.
Oh, you know what? They're filming. Yeah, you're right. They're filming there, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got to choose the Jordanians.
Mhm.
Yeah, which doesn't make any sense, but who cares? But yeah, right. I mean, part of it is they're going through the thrill that, I mean, here's the thing is what's funny about all this is we don't really talk about our favorite, like, blockbuster franchise, which is Mission Impossible.
Whoa, wait. Our favorite?
It's my favorite.
Oh, okay.
We've talked about, I mean, it's the most quality at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to check some notes. I don't know. I think Nolan's Batman trilogy probably outranks Mission Impossible in my book, but
Oh no, I don't actually disagree with that. But ongoing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, to be determined on my account, but that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
But part of it is the thrills, you know, they've done things with the Burj Khalifa, right? But what they did with the Burj Khalifa is hang Tom Cruise off of it.
Oh, yeah.
Which seems like an extraordinarily bad idea, but they did it and it was awesome. As opposed to, you know,
driving a car through the two towers.
Well, but like presumably not actually driving car, but like CGI car through the two towers, which is like, you know, I don't really care. Also, you bring in Ronda Rousey, and then you have a really horribly shot hand-to-hand fight scene.
Oh god, it's just that was rough.
So the part of the problem with these is they're not. I think part of the difficulty with me like really digging it is that the action isn't that good. So like when you invoke this. When you invoke the need for a musical, you're thinking of War, like the Indian action movie War.
For sure I was, yeah.
Which, I mean, this is your point originally when we talked about it, is it outdoes the Fast movies in doing what they do, plus dance numbers.
Yeah. And to be fair, I mean, War only really has 2 dance numbers, and they're like cutaway scenes that they function as music videos. But in general, the Bollywood tradition or the format, you know, you're going to have like, okay, here's the romantic song where somebody falls in love. You'll have maybe an intro song for a character. Like there's a lot more usually. But no, War even has a chase scene between 2, like, I don't know, Lamborghinis or whatever. I don't know, cars on the ice in their climax, which you get in Fate of the Furious, I believe, which comes afterwards chronologically from War, because War came out in 2019. It was more recent. But still, like, it's just, you're like, there's a internationally appreciated format you could be operating with. But I mean, they're multiplex event movies where like you can be like, oh, that's a cool scene, and like, oh, this seems boring for a minute. They're talking about a romantic relationship, or I guess we probably need to address Paul Walker, because like he's around and part of this franchise, and then like died in real life, but then they don't kill him in the series. They're just like, we're not going to go bother him. He's being a family man now.
Right.
Which is kind of weird. I had forgotten that I knew he passed away, but I was like, when we were watching Furious 7, I didn't know what point in this series of films he died and then couldn't be filming anymore. And then the ending of Furious 7, we're like, okay, I guess he died during this filming, because the whole end is just this weird kind of goodbye to him, but like he's still alive as a character.
Yeah. It's a little weird, but you know, here's the thing: is this for fans of this franchise and the actors involved,
makes perfect sense.
It's very emotional. So that's the thing, is like, this is a series where people really get invested, like people care. And I just want to say, like, we're critiquing these movies at a film level, but at least like, you know, I get it, and I don't really wish them ill in the great scheme of things. Like, I think
I don't wish them ill, but I also don't get it. Because I watched 7, I was like, it's fine. And the only thing that compelled me to watch 8 was the Fate of the Furious, was that sections of it were filmed in Cleveland and Charlize Theron was the bad guy. And I was like, all right, I'll hit play. And then when it was done, I was like, I'm good with this franchise. I'm good.
I think 5 sort of explained it for me, because 5 really got me in.
You did say, because you said after 5, you were like, I'll keep going here.
Yeah, I want to watch another one. Like, I want to feel that.
Maybe I'll give that one a shot. Maybe I go back and then and see. Maybe it'll build again. It's unfair. I watched them out of order. Like I've dipped my toe in a couple of times. So,
but part of it is like, is it though? Because like, that's the thing, is like, I don't think any of the ones after 5 capture what 5 does.
Could be.
So you're like,
I mean, it sounds like it. Yeah.
You're like just living off of this, you know, like this. Part of the thing about 5 is what they get is the cool hangout.
I remember you saying that, like, you said it was a good hangout movie, and I was like, I'm always up for one of those, so
Right. And it's like,
maybe I give it a shot.
you want to hang out with these people because they're family, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is like, yeah, like I don't know. So I guess I get that. I get that it's, in a world of franchises that like don't look like the world that we live in. These are deeply diverse, and they're also, to be totally honest, I think they're a step up from your Transformer movies in a lot of ways, but they do a lot of the same things in that you could leave and come back.
Right. Yeah, like your multiplex blockbusters where there's a bathroom break, there's a popcorn refill, I need another beer, I'm gonna play a video game for a minute because the romantic subplot's kicking in and I don't give a shit.
Yeah, I think that's actually it. I think your original point there is actually what holds it together.
I mean, we're now in the world. Well, I mean, theaters are kind of a interesting non-world right now, but where there's, apps that tell you when it's cool to take a bathroom break in a movie.
That's horrible.
At the theater, and you're like, oh, okay. And then, stuff is designed to fit into that world, and these films are no exception to that. So
you're not supposed to be able to have an app in a theater because you shouldn't have your phone on.
That's true.
It's
true.
This is wrong. This is all wrong.
Well, Isaac, I think that's a pretty eclectic, I will say, survey of, actually, we didn't really head too far into like the modern blockbuster, but we got up into some of the teens there. I hadn't thought about it ahead of time, but since we had our Michael Bay, our Zack Snyder, Mel Gibson trifecta there as the core of this, is like there is sort of like I know Zack Snyder doesn't say it, but like does seem to be kind of like a male white right winger reactionary element to some of these blockbusters in this time period.
I mean, here's the thing is, I think that we made particular choices in what we did. What I actually regret the most, and I think we should do an episode on this at some point, is if we're talking about the politics of cinema, the most interesting blockbuster series politically probably is Hunger Games. I mean, that's the influence of Occupy, right? Hunger Games is the Occupy one, right?
I've only seen the first movie, so I'm not sure.
I mean, yeah, but even the first one, like that's what it's about, right? It's about inequality and so forth, and then the nature of revolution. So I think it's worth going back to at some point. But like that's, I think we ended up choosing a lot of that, right? It's not surprising that there's like reactionary ones. In some ways, they're less reactionary than whatever. But I think we also like those are like the most interesting politically, so we ended up doing those. I mean, except for the Fast movies, where like you really can barely find anything because it's pure fluff.
Well, it was one of those like, well, we're hoping, and also we'd seen a lot of stuff of this time period, and we're like, well, what haven't I seen? Like, and I hadn't seen Fast movies, and I hadn't dipped my toe into Transformers besides the first one and part of the second one. So it was like, well, let's see what we got here. There's like, I think there may be an interesting track to look at. You've got James Bond coming back with GoldenEye, Die Another Day, Tomorrow Never Dies, and then moving into Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, whatever the more recent ones were. Like there's some maybe interesting geopolitical trajectory with the way that James Bond develops over time too. It could be kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, that would actually be very interesting.
And when you get into animation, like this time period is just like, I mean, a new golden age of animation beyond just the Disney Pixar domination of the 90s. But I don't know, politically, like what that may or may not mean, other than, people realized, oh, there's a shitload of money to be made in cinematic universes tied to animation that the whole family, specifically kids, can enjoy, and then buy all kinds of products associated with it. So, or comedies, we mentioned in the 80s and 90s, going all the way back to like Stir Crazy in 80, and Sidney Poitier directing the first $100 million grossing film for an African-American director in Hollywood. They just seem like they lose their teeth at a certain point, politically speaking, in the blockbuster realm. Not that there are not great ones out there, but like in that blockbuster realm, aside from Austin Powers, the time period we were just talking about, it's all, Robert De Niro going comedy and Ben Stiller movies for the family.
Yeah. This has occurred to me. I mean, in some ways this would have been the ideal moment to talk about The Dark Knight, which is your kind of your greatest 9/11 blockbuster, right? Or your War on Terror blockbuster, right?
War on Terror blockbuster, yeah.
And its sequel, which is the anti-Occupy blockbuster made before Occupy.
All potential future shows then.
Right. I think in some ways we chose the worst of the I mean, I don't regret it. I think we got a lot of good stuff out of this.
Yeah, it was an experiment. I will give it that.
But you know, I think we chose the, you know, the most reprehensible.
Well, yeah, we've got several text messages back and forth of like, oh God, not another one. All right, I'm gonna do this one.
So this has been our summer series.
Yeah.
And, you know, our summer series last time was an absurdly intense go through the 60s, which we could never replicate because...
Well, what we would need is another global pandemic and, you know, reduced hours at work, if not just unemployed, and a lot of free time. So until that happens again... wait. Yeah, no, that's not replicable till this show is our job.
So people
pays the bills. But anyway,
until we actually create a Patreon, and then then we can see if we can make it our job.
Until then, Isaac, what have we got on deck? A couple of announcements here and housekeeping at the end.
So, as you may have noticed, we had a bit of a gap between this and our last episode. We've been trying to keep it to every 2 weeks. We went from every week to every 2 weeks. This is just the nature of our lives, unfortunately. I am in the middle of moving to Santa Barbara, California for a PhD. And so we're going to take, I think probably about a 3-week hiatus, maybe, or maybe a month hiatus, to give me some chance to move, frankly.
We don't need to add more anxiety to a cross-country move, so.
Yeah, and, you know, and
take your time.
Right. And it'll give us a little time to sort of pull together some ideas, which we've got a lot of, but yeah, so we're going to take a little break, which we sort of already did, and then come back stronger than ever. But, you know, we're finding a new equilibrium. We're not going away. I'm going to be in Santa Barbara, which means I'll be right next to LA. So I'm going to get
the belly of the beast, Isaac. Come on.
I'm going to go right into the belly of the beast. I'm going to get really, hopefully this will just lead me to be even more obnoxious.
But yeah, we will be back shortly in the grand scheme of things. But before we sign off, we like to do the obligatory ask of, you know, rate, review the show, pass it on if you're a fan, if you're interested, whatever app you're using as some sort of a rating system. If you enjoy the show, maybe tell a friend or 2 or 3. We're also up on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the usual stuff. If you want to check out some of the stuff we've been posting about the blockbusters through the years, stuff that's tied into the show, some stuff is just like whatever we're watching right then. I put up something on Instagram because I was watching, for whatever reason, a Harry Reams 1975 porn movie, and there was like Black liberation articles and books in the background. I was like, huh, I never thought about set dressing on a porn film in the 70s, but there's some pretty solid politics in that movie in the background. In
many ways, a better time.
Yeah, much better time. So you never know. Whatever we're watching and discovering is posted up on there on occasion. But until next time, and whatever it is we will be covering, I am Aaron Spears.
And I'm Isaac Miller. And, well, it appears the pandemic is not over. It appears that things are dangerous. I'm hoping that all of you are vaxxed out there. If you're not, please do get vaxxed. And stay safe. You know, it's time to mask up again, unfortunately, but it's just the way it is.
It's like voting. It's the least you can do.
It's literally the least you can do to even make the slightest effort to keep people safe.